You should see these shocking historical photos. Write your opinion in the comments. June 5, 1968. After Robert F. Kennedy was shot at Los Angeles' Ambassador Hotel, Ethel Kennedy pushed through the chaos as cameras closed in. He had just won the California primary. By the next day, America had lost its second Kennedy brother in 5 years. In 1984, 14-year-old Rachel Jones became the legal wife of Vernon Howell. Later, David Koresh, the Branch Davidian leader at Waco. 9 years later, she died with him in the fire that ended the 51-day Waco siege in 1993. 1945, a crippled B-29. Superfortress ditches off Iwo Jima, beneath Mount Suribachi, the volcano Marines had just bled to take. For crews returning shattered from raids on Japan, this tiny island could mean rescue instead of the Pacific grave. June 4, 1953, 4:15 a.m. Shot Climax detonated 406 meters above the Nevada test site, turning desert night into nuclear daylight. At 61 kilotons, roughly 4 times Hiroshima, it was the final blast of Operation Upshot Knothole. June 4, 1944, Aliya Moldagulova, an 18-year-old Kazakh sniper, was posthumously named Hero of the Soviet Union. A survivor of besieged Leningrad and a graduate of the Women's Sniper School, she died on the Eastern Front after fighting her way into Soviet legend. New York, 1960s. Eddie Carmel was billed as the Jewish Giant, but behind the poster was a Bronx College graduate with acromegaly, poems, jokes, and a rock band. Born Oded Ha-Carmeli in Jaffa in 1936, he chased radio, music, comedy, and dignity until his death at just 36. 2011 to 2013. Texas neurosurgeon Christopher Dunch turned routine spine surgeries into paralysis, blood loss, and death, earning the name Dr. Death. After 33 patients were harmed or killed out of 38 operations, the real horror was that the system kept letting him cut. June 5, 1968, moments after Robert F. Kennedy was shot inside the Ambassador Hotel, his wife tried to push cameras away from the chaos. He had just won California's Democratic primary. Less than 26 hours later, another Kennedy was dead. Southern England, circa 1940. Children in gas masks skip rope, training for a war that expected poison gas from the sky. Britain had issued tens of millions of masks before the Blitz. The gas never came, but the bombs did. Circa 1959. Josephine Baker holds her 10th adopted child, a boy from Venezuela, part of the Rainbow Tribe she raised as a living challenge to racism. The American-born star built a family of 12 children from different backgrounds, turning motherhood into a public answer to segregation and hate. Months before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was pulled from the edge of a moving train by actor Edwin Booth. The dark twist: Edwin's younger brother, John Wilkes Booth, would kill Robert's father in Washington in 1865. August 5, 1962. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in Los Angeles at 36, with fatal levels of barbiturates in her body. Ruled a probable suicide, her death became one of Hollywood's most haunting and disputed mysteries. July 3, 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 took off for Dubai. Minutes later, USS Vincennes shot it down over the Persian Gulf. All 290 people aboard died, including 66 children. The U.S. called it a tragic mistake. Iran never forgot. Edward Einstein, Albert Einstein's youngest son, was a gifted student who dreamed of psychiatry before schizophrenia overtook his life. After Albert left Europe in 1933, father and son never met again. Edward died in a Zurich psychiatric clinic in 1965. December 1900, the Flannan Isles light went dark on remote Island Moor. When relief arrived, all 3 keepers had vanished. The official inquiry blamed a massive wave sweeping them from the cliffs, but the empty lighthouse made Scotland's coldest sea mystery immortal. Born in France in 1946, Andrei Roussimoff was already over 6 feet tall by age 12. The pituitary disorder that made him famous was also slowly destroying him. As Andre the Giant, he became wrestling's biggest myth and a Hollywood icon. In 1993, heart failure ended his life at just 46. April 1975. As Saigon neared collapse, Hugh Hefner sent his Big Bunny jet to evacuate Vietnamese orphans during Operation Babylift. Playboy bunnies cared for the children mid-air, one of the strangest rescue flights of the Vietnam War's final days. October 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed high in the Andes, trapping a rugby team and other passengers in snow for 72 days. Only 16 survived. When food ran out, they stayed alive on the dead, until 2 men crossed the mountains and found help. Late 1800s, bathing machines rolled swimmers into the sea, so Victorian beachgoers, especially women, could enter the water unseen. What looks like a row of tiny huts was really a moving wall between Modesty and the ocean. 1920 to 1933, Prohibition banned alcohol under the 18th Amendment and accidentally gave America speakeasies, bootleggers, and jazz-soaked nightlife. By the time the 21st Amendment killed the ban, the country had learned how to drink in secret and party louder than before. 1984, Rachel Jones was 14 when she became the legal wife of Vernon Howell, the man later known as David Koresh. By 1993, she was dead inside the Waco compound, one of the youngest lives trapped in his rise from preacher to cult leader. April 14, 1912, Titanic lookout. Frederick Fleet saw the iceberg first and rang the warning bell. Iceberg right ahead. The warning came too late. Fleet survived the sinking, but the night followed him until his suicide in 1965. 1849, after Britain annexed Punjab, the 105.6-carat Koh-i-Noor was taken from 10-year-old Maharaja Duleep Singh and sent to Queen Victoria. Now locked in the Tower of London, the Mountain of Light remains one of the British Empire's most disputed trophies. June 30th, 1999, Ricky McCormick was found dead in a Missouri cornfield 20 miles from St. Louis with 2 coded notes in his pockets. 12 years later, the FBI asked the public to crack them. The message and how McCormick died still remain unsolved. 1996, Doreen Leoy, a former magazine editor, married Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, inside San Quentin's prison visiting room. He was on death row for 13 murders. She had spent years writing him letters and insisting he was innocent. March 28, 1941, Virginia Woolf filled her pockets with stones and walked into the River Ouse after leaving 2 farewell notes. She died fearing her mind was collapsing again, but her books had already changed the way literature entered the human mind. North Dakota, 1966. The blizzard didn't just bury roads, it swallowed utility poles nearly up to the wires. DOT worker Bill Koch stood beside the drift for scale. Nearby, even a train got trapped trying to push through. July 2, 1937, Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan vanished while searching the Pacific for tiny Howland Island. His job was to find one speck of land in endless ocean, miss it by minutes, and the world's most famous flight became a mystery. 1918, Annie Oakley teaches women to shoot, turning marksmanship into confidence years before women even had the vote. The sharpshooter who built a career outshooting men was now putting rifles directly into women's hands. 1918, packed onto a troop ship returning from France, American soldiers turned the deck into a makeshift boxing arena. Men who had survived trenches, mud, artillery, and gas crowded every railing to watch a fight that finally meant they were going home alive. 1941, Wilhelm II, the last German Kaiser, stands behind a fence in Dutch exile. The man who once ruled an empire, now watched by Nazi police. After losing his throne in World War I, he died in the German-occupied Netherlands before Hitler could use him again. 1955, a 7-year-old boy in the Bronx watches an atomic blast broadcast live from the Nevada desert. For America's Cold War children, the mushroom cloud entered the living room before they could fully understand it. Moscow, July the 24th, 1959. Khrushchev and Nixon argued inside a model American kitchen, turning washing machines, color TVs, and consumer goods into Cold War weapons. No missiles were fired in the kitchen debate, just two superpowers fighting over whose future ordinary people would choose. London, 1918. Captured German aircraft are paraded through packed streets, turned from weapons of war into trophies on wheels. For a city that had endured Zeppelin and bomber raids, this was revenge displayed in broad daylight. Przemysl, 1940. Soviet oil products are pumped into German tank cars on the border created after Hitler and Stalin carved up Poland. Before Operation Barbarossa turned them into enemies, Moscow was still fueling the war machine that would soon invade it. Nuremberg, 1945. Women cook in the ruins of a city the Nazis once staged as a monument to power. After bombs and street fighting reduced it to rubble, daily life came down to fire, pots, and survival among the stones. Dhaka, Bengal, circa 1900. Before motorcades, power could arrive on elephants, a living procession of status, ceremony, and empire. In British India, such parades turned the street itself into a stage for wealth, rank, and colonial spectacle. World War I. German assault troops pose in heavy steel body armor, built for the brutal new world of trenches, shrapnel, and machine gun fire. It could stop fragments and sometimes bullets, but in the mud of the front, protection often meant carrying a metal prison. New York, 1958. A giant squid model is prepared for the American Museum of Natural History, turning one of the deep sea's rarest creatures into something visitors could face. Before underwater cameras revealed them alive, museum science had to build the monster from evidence and imagination. 1932. A gas mask lens is struck with a hammer as engineers test whether protection would survive panic, impact, and war. Between two world wars, even the glass over a man's eyes had to be ready for poison gas. June 28, 1914. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie left Sarajevo's City Hall after already surviving one assassination attempt that morning. A wrong turn soon stopped their car near Gavrilo Princip, and two pistol shots helped push Europe into World War I. 1939. German and Soviet officers mark their new border after Hitler and Stalin divided Poland between them. For a brief moment, the two dictatorships stood side by side, before the same line became a battlefield in 1941. 1915. Hungarian troops climb a rock face with rifles on their backs, showing a World War I front where the battlefield rose into the sky. Far from the flat trenches, soldiers fought on cliffs and mountain passes, where gravity could kill before the enemy even fired. December 8, 1941. Hours after Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft struck U.S. bases in the Philippines, wiping out airfields almost unopposed. Within months, American and Filipino forces were pushed into surrender, and thousands were driven into the Bataan Death March. June 4, 1989. Two Soviet passenger trains passed through a leaking gas cloud near Ufa, and a single spark turned the night into fire. At least 575 people died, many of them families heading to the Black Sea, in a disaster largely buried by the world's focus on Tiananmen Square. Balaclava, 1909. Russian writer Alexander Kuprin stands in a diving suit beside his wife before descending beneath the Black Sea. For Kuprin, life was never just observed from a desk. He chased danger closely enough to turn experience into literature. El Salvador, 1980. Children show nuns a captured snake as civil war begins turning ordinary childhood into survival. Behind the smiles was a country sliding into hunger, fear, and a conflict that would last until 1992. January 30th, 1972. Bloody Sunday turned a civil rights march in Derry into one of the darkest days of the Northern Ireland conflict. British paratroopers shot 26 unarmed civilians, killing 13 that day. A 14th died later, and the killings radicalized a generation. Vietnam, February 1968. A U.S. Marine sniper team scans for targets as the Tet Offensive turns cities, streets, and rooftops into battlefields. In a war of jungles and ambushes, sometimes survival came down to one rifle, one spotter, and 1 second. March 2nd, 1938. Floodwaters from the Los Angeles River tear through a Southern Pacific bridge as Southern California drowns under winter storms. The 1938 flood killed more than 100 people and helped turn the LA River into the concrete channel known today. United States, circa 1890. Cotton workers stand inside a processing room where loose fiber hangs from the rafters like industrial snow. Decades after emancipation, cotton still ruled through dust, machinery, and the brutal labor that fed America's textile economy. Riga, 1991. Lenin's statue is hauled down by ropes as Latvia breaks away from the Soviet Union after decades under Moscow's rule. Crowds watched the bronze giant fall in the capital. Not just a monument collapsing, but an empire losing its symbols in real time. Ethiopia, 1935. An Orthodox priest blesses soldiers as Mussolini's invasion turns faith, empire, and resistance into one battlefield. Facing planes, poison gas, and modern artillery, Ethiopia went to war with rifles, prayers, and a kingdom's survival at stake. Los Angeles, 1984. Behind the screams of a nightmare on Elm Street, the horror was built in silence with makeup, patience, and practical effects. Before CG I could fake nightmares, a small crew turned burned latex and studio lights into a face audiences never forgot. Leningrad, January 1944. Civilians gather as the siege is finally lifted after 872 days of hunger, shelling, and frozen streets. For survivors, this was not victory in the usual sense. It was the first breath after one of history's longest urban nightmares. Berlin, 1961. East German workers turned concrete blocks into the wall that would split a city, families, and the Cold War itself. What began with barbed wire in August became a 96-mile barrier guarded by guns, towers, and fear. Shelbyville, Tennessee, 1934. A white mob of hundreds tried to lynch a black teenager accused of assaulting a 14-year-old girl. The Tennessee National Guard opened fire when tear gas failed, killing 4 attackers and stopping the lynching before it could happen. 1941. Polish prisoners of war emerged from Soviet captivity after months of hunger, forced labor, and disease. Released only after Hitler turned on Stalin, they carried the marks of a prison system few outside had seen. New York, February 1912. An Italian woman carries a crate of dry goods through the city's immigrant streets with the weight balanced on her head. In the shadows of early skyscrapers, America's new arrivals built their lives one brutal load at a time. Italy, December 1944. Soldiers of New Zealand's Maori battalion pose with barrels of tot, mutton birds, sent from home for Christmas dinner. Thousands of miles from Aotearoa, one wartime meal carried the taste of family, tribe, and survival. 1985. A royal training session puts an MP-5K submachine gun in the hands of one of the world's most photographed women. Behind the glamour was a security world of drills, threats, and armed protection, where even palace life had to meet the reality of gunfire. 1918. Barbers wear masks during the Spanish flu pandemic, trying to keep business alive while a virus swept through crowded cities. A century before COVID, the fight over infection was already happening inches from a stranger's face. Burma, World War II. Japanese troops move with elephants and mahouts through terrain where trucks, roads, and modern warfare often failed. In the Jungle Campaign, survival depended not only on weapons, but on animals that could carry war through mud, rivers, and mountains. Spain, 1938. Nurses raised the nationalist salute to Francisco Franco as the Spanish Civil War moves toward its final year. Within months, Franco's forces would win, and Spain would enter a dictatorship that lasted nearly 4 decades. Andersonville, 1864. Nearly 45,000 Union prisoners were crowded into this Confederate camp where hunger, disease, and exposure killed almost 13,000. Before the Civil War even ended, the ground beside the prison was already becoming a national cemetery. Amritsar, August 1947. Partition turned trains into lifelines as thousands fled the new border between India and Pakistan. What was meant to mark independence became one of the largest and bloodiest migrations in modern history. Chabwa Stockade, 1945. Private Herman Perry stands in chains after months hiding in the Indo-Burmese jungle. Accused of killing his commanding officer in wartime India, he became the center of one of World War II's strangest manhunts. Mulhouse, November 1944. German soldiers surrender to France's 1st Armored Division as Allied forces break into Alsace near the Reich's doorstep. For men who had occupied France for 4 years, the war was suddenly ending with hands raised in a ruined street. March 19, 1945. USS Franklin burns off Japan after a bomb detonates among fueled armed aircraft on her hangar deck. Explosions tore through the carrier as USS Santa Fe came alongside. One of the worst U.S. Navy disasters any ship ever survived. Berlin, September 1930. Hitler sits with 107 Nazi deputies after an election that turned his movement from fringe party into national force. The Nazis had won only 12 seats 2 years earlier. Now Germany's democracy was watching its enemy enter through the front door. Cleveland, 1952. The Cuyahoga River burns after oil and industrial waste turn the water itself into fuel. This was not the river's last fire, but it showed how badly America's industrial age had poisoned its own cities. Arkansas, 1962. Charles Fields is led away after a 90-minute escape that exposed the madness of arming a life sentence inmate as a prison trustee. With that pistol, he stole 3 trucks, killed a farmer, and attacked another woman before being recaptured. France, November 17, 1944. First Sergeant John Morton points to the bullet hole in the helmet that somehow failed to kill him. After his half-track was knocked out, he kept fighting with a carbine and Thompson, actions that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. Minsk, October 26, 1941. Soviet underground fighters are led to execution, forced to wear a sign admitting they shot German soldiers. Among them was 16-year-old Masha Bruskina, one of many teenagers pulled into the first brutal months of Nazi occupation. Loch Ness, 1966. Brenda Sherritt marked her 18th birthday by swimming 22.5 miles through one of Britain's coldest, most legendary waters. While the world searched for a monster, she turned the lake itself into a test of endurance. Murchison, New Zealand, 1929. A country road splits open after one of the nation's most powerful earthquakes. The quake triggered massive landslides, killed 17 people, and left the ground itself looking torn apart. Dhaka, 1970. Female students march with rifles through the streets when the city was still East Pakistan, not yet Bangladesh. Within a year, protest would become war. And these young women looked like a nation already preparing to be born. Late 1890s. Ella Williams, billed as a Boma, toured sideshows as the tallest lady in the world, in an era that sold human rarity as spectacle. Behind the jeweled costume was a black performer turning height, stagecraft, and public curiosity into a career. Hawazeh Marshes, 1985. Iranian soldiers wait in gas masks beside a sign that says, "Smile, my brother." In the Iran-Iraq War, even a joke on a wooden board felt unreal when the next wind could carry poison gas. Occupied Soviet Union, 1942. Soldiers gather beside an SS gas van, one of the Holocaust's most deliberately hidden murder tools. Built to kill prisoners with engine exhaust, it turned a truck into a moving gas chamber. Mid-1960s, Motown's finest stand together. The Supremes, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and Martha and the Vandellas. In one frame, Detroit's hit factory looks less like a label and more like the sound of an era posing on the steps. Yankee Stadium, April 1923. Babe Ruth shakes hands with President Warren G. Harding as baseball becomes America's grand public stage. That same year, Ruth christened the new stadium with power, on his way to a career record of 714 home runs. Chungking, 1939. Civilians crowd into a makeshift tunnel shelter as Japanese bombers turn China's wartime capital into a city under siege. For years, survival here meant racing underground, waiting in darkness while the sky above exploded. Norway, 1994. The former Soviet cruiser Murmansk runs aground while being towed to India for scrap. A Cold War warship built for confrontation ended its life rusting sideways off a quiet Arctic fishing village. Heimaey, Iceland, January 1973. The Eldfell volcano erupts beside a town, burying homes while firefighters fight lava with seawater. Nearly the entire island was evacuated overnight, then returned to a place half buried, but not erased. May 29, 1953. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first confirmed climbers to stand on Everest's summit. They spent only minutes on top of the world. Then began the far deadlier task of getting back down alive. Correggio, Italy, 1939 to 1940. Leonardo Cianciulli, the soap maker of Correggio, murdered 3 women and used caustic soda to destroy their bodies. What looked like an ordinary kitchen pot became part of one of Italy's darkest true crime cases. 1959. Soviet transplant pioneer Vladimir Demikov grafted a puppy's head onto a larger dog, creating one of medicine's most disturbing experiments. Both heads could see, smell, and swallow. But the animal lived only 4 days, leaving science with a breakthrough wrapped in horror. Midland, Texas, 1894. A wall of dust rolls toward town, swallowing the horizon long before the Dust Bowl had a name. On the open plains, weather could arrive like an army, turning daylight into grit, darkness, and silence. Minnesota, 1862. Settlers flee the U.S.-Dakota War, loading families and possessions onto wagons as violence spreads across the frontier. Behind the panic was a deeper catastrophe: broken treaties, hunger, and a war that shattered both Dakota and settler lives. Wembley Stadium, 1934. Footballer Wally Kilminster relaxes in a foam bath with his dog after a matchday world of mud, crowds, and hard tackles. Before luxury sports recovery rooms, this was peak comfort: hot water, soap, and a loyal teammate in the tub. 1939. German and Soviet officers stand at the newly marked border after Hitler and Stalin divided Poland under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. For a brief moment, the two dictatorships were partners, before Nazi Germany turned on the USSR less than 2 years later. Circa 1950. Toy factory workers hand-paint faces onto rows of doll heads, turning blank molded parts into tiny expressions. Before mass automation made toys identical, every smile, eyebrow, and blush still passed through human hands. March 27, 1977. 2 Boeing 747s collided in fog on Tenerife's runway, killing 583 people in the deadliest accident in aviation history. A missed clearance, poor visibility, and seconds of confusion turned a crowded airport into the wreckage of Pan Am and KLM giants. Buchenwald, 1945. 8-year-old Yisrael Meir Lau walks free after becoming one of the youngest survivors of the Nazi camp. Orphaned by the Holocaust, he would later become Israel's chief rabbi, a life rebuilt from the edge of extermination. 1914. Clara Zetkin and Rosa Luxemburg walk together as Europe edges toward war and socialist movements fracture under nationalism. Both fought for women's rights and revolution, but only one would survive the violence that followed World War I. Guadalajara, Mexico, 1992. Gasoline leaking into the sewers turned city streets into underground bombs. A chain of explosions ripped open miles of pavement, killing more than 200 people and swallowing cars whole. England, February 1942. RAF crews load bombs into an American-built A-20 Boston, one of the warplanes sent across the Atlantic before the U.S. was fully at war. In this quiet field, machinery, muscle, and Allied supply lines were being turned into another night over occupied Europe. Brazil, May Day, 1975. Young Union leader Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is lifted by workers years before he would lead strikes against the military dictatorship. Born a poor metal worker, Lula turned factory floor politics into national power and became president of Brazil in 2003. Hawaii, late 1930s. A pre-war U.S. Army support troop lines up with rifles, swimsuits, and stage smiles for soldiers stationed in the Pacific. Just a few years later, the islands would become America's front line when Pearl Harbor turned paradise into war. 1937. Robert Wadlow, the tallest man ever recorded, stands beside Clarence Major Mite Howerton, one of the smallest performers of the era. At 8 feet 11 inches and just 2 feet 4 inches, they turned one photograph into a human scale, impossible to ignore. Seton Hall, New Jersey, 2000. After a dorm fire killed 3 students and injured 58, this door was left marked by desperate hands. The alarm had sounded like another false call. Until a prank fire in Boland Hall turned real at 4:30 a.m. World War I, 1918. Germany tests a trench-digging machine built to carve through earth faster than exhausted soldiers with shovels. Even in a war defined by mud and trenches, engineers were already trying to mechanize the battlefield itself. Boston, 1937. Intoxicated men sleep it off in a police drunk tank where a hard bench served as the city's answer to a dangerous night out. Before modern detox centers and emergency outreach, public drunkenness often ended behind tiled walls until morning. United States, 1977. David Prowse, the body of Darth Vader, poses at a bowling alley with Kenny Baker, the man inside R2-D2. Off-screen, the galaxy's dark villain and its tiny droid were just 2 actors laughing before Star Wars became mythology. 1945. This Soviet certificate states that Guards Senior Sergeant Nikolai Agapov bought his own T-3485 tank with personal savings and fought in it. Some men saved for a house or a car. Agapov saved for 32 tons of armor, tracks, and war. Early 1900s. A tattooed young man poses for a studio portrait, his chest and arms covered at a time when tattoos still marked outsiders, sailors, and hard lives. Before tattoos became fashion, they were often a biography written directly on the skin. Petrograd, 1917. Empress Alexandra's wardrobe lies torn open after the Winter Palace fell during the Bolshevik uprising. The private rooms of Russia's last imperial family became a silent witness to the Romanov world collapsing overnight. 1942. A Soviet political officer, long identified as Alexei Yeremenko, raises his pistol and drives his men forward on the Eastern Front. The photograph became known as Combat. A frozen second of command, courage, and almost certain death. Lubeck, 1981. Marianne Bachmeier walks from court after shooting the man on trial for murdering her 7-year-old daughter. She fired inside the courtroom itself, turning grief, rage, and justice into one of Germany's most infamous trials. Russia, 1994. A woman rallies for Sergei Mavrodi, the MMM founder, arrested after building one of post-Soviet Russia's largest financial pyramids. Millions had trusted him with their savings. And even after the collapse, some still defended the man who ruined them. Often shared online as a record-breaking 85-meter wave, this image sits closer to viral legend than verified history. The real ocean is terrifying enough. Tsunamis and rogue waves have erased coastlines without needing a perfect photograph. Cleveland, 1986. 1.5 million balloons were released for charity, turning a record-breaking spectacle into a citywide disaster. Wind and rain pushed them into Lake Erie, roads, and forests. And the celebration ended in lawsuits, cleanup, and regret. Bosnia, 1995. A wedding party walks through war, with an armed escort guarding the bride and groom. Even as the Bosnian War tore cities and families apart, life still demanded vows, witnesses, and a reason to keep moving. Barcelona, October 1934. Catalonia's government stands behind bars after President Luis Companys defied Madrid and proclaimed a Catalan state. The revolt lasted only hours. But this prison photo captured Spain cracking years before civil war exploded. Sochi, 1983. The cargo ship Kolasin sits stranded on the Black Sea coast, towering over the railway like a shipwreck dropped onto dry land. Before it was cut apart for scrap, the rusting giant became a Soviet-era landmark of steel, storms, and decay. Moscow, 1903. A Spiton vendor serves hot honey and spiced drink on Theater Square, warming strangers in the winter mud. Before coffee carts and neon cafes, old Moscow had samovars, street cries, and steam rising from brass. Persian Gulf, May 18, 1979. A Soviet IL-38 patrol aircraft passes low over the U.S. carrier Midway and her deck full of fighters. In the Cold War, even a flyover was a message. One machine counting another, close enough to be photographed. Kursk region, 1943. Corporal Semyon Trifonov holds his child during a final meeting with his family before returning to the front. He would later die crossing the Dnieper, leaving this color photograph as their last moment together. Lofoten Islands, 1910. Norwegian fishermen pose with massive Arctic cod, their faces blackened by salt, oil, and days at sea. For centuries, the Lofoten fishery fed families, towns, and an economy built on winter storms, wooden boats, and dangerous waters. Colorado, 1948. W. Eugene Smith followed rural Dr. Ernest Cariani through storms, exhaustion, and emergencies for his legendary life photo essay. Before medicine became systems and screens, one country doctor carried an entire town's fear in a black bag. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. Police dogs are turned on civil rights demonstrators as the fight against segregation spills into the streets. Images like this shocked the nation, showing that Jim Crow was not just law, but organized violence. Nicaragua, 1979. Susan Meiselas captured a Sandinista fighter hurling a Molotov cocktail during the uprising against Somoza's dictatorship. The image became larger than one battle, a revolution frozen in one arm, one flame, and 1 second. St. Petersburg, early 1900s. Skaters move across the frozen city, turning winter into a public stage beneath imperial facades. Long before indoor arenas and polished rinks, the ice itself became a meeting place for sport, fashion, and spectacle. USSR, 1930s. People line up for kerosene, the fuel that kept lamps burning and stoves alive in countless Soviet homes. Behind the promise of rapid industrial progress, ordinary life still often meant waiting in line for the basics. Japan, October 1, 1964. The first Shinkansen bullet train enters service just days before Tokyo shows its rebuilt face to the Olympic world. At 210 kilometers per hour, it made post-war Japan look impossible to ignore. Faster, cleaner, and pointed straight into the future. Los Angeles, 1959. Before Cher became a pop icon, Sherilyn Sarkeesian was already surrounded by rebel folklore. The mugshot is likely staged from a school photo. But the story of young Cher, police trouble, and a stolen ride became part of the myth. London, 1926. An underground carriage is hauled through the street, turning a piece of the subway into a traffic-stopping spectacle. Before it carried passengers beneath the city, this train had to make one strange journey above it. Florence, November 1966. The Arno River burst through the city, swallowing streets, cars, churches, and priceless Renaissance art. When the water fell, thousands of volunteers, the Mud Angels, came to rescue a drowned capital of culture by hand. California, 1891. The 1,300-year-old Mark Twain tree was cut down so its giant cross-section could prove to skeptics that such trees were real. A living sequoia became a museum exhibit, one of the clearest images of wonder turning into destruction.